process
This conference will now be recorded.
Oh, sorry about that. This process would be exactly the same if I was using, for example, LeanFT, Appium, and if I was using a different IDE such as IntelliJ or Visual Studio. So what I'm going to go through now with this demo would be, exactly the same if any of those tools you are currently using. Okay, so this is looks quite a scary slide. There's a lot on here, arrows pointing everywhere, but this is the integration. So this is the tools we are talking about here. So we've got Octane center to all of this as our agile project management tool. So within Octane, we can define our epics, our features, our user stories. We've got our defect management. We've also got our test management. We can manage manual tests as well as automated tests. So Octane is obviously central to all of this. And what we're going to look at is really, as I say, around automation. So we're going to talk about the fact that, at an enterprise level, we'd have a number of automation engineers. So that's on the bottom left corner here, who will be developing test automation scripts in their IDEs. And because we've got a team of automation engineers, we're going to want to manage our automation project through some kind of source control. So in this case, we're going to be using Git. So our automation engineers developing automated scripts, and then they are keeping those in source control locally in Git. And then we can push those up to a GitHub project. So the GitHub project is our automated test suite, and essentially we can have a whole team of automated engineers working on that automated test suite project at the same time. Now, the way that Octane works is when it comes to executing automated tests, we execute them through a CI server. So in this case, we're using Jenkins, but we could be using TeamCity, Bamboo, etc., TFS. So we are going to create a Jenkins job that will pull our automated project, or automated test suite, from GitHub, build it, execute it, and then pass the results back to Octane. So in Octane, we can see the status of our automated tests and whether they passed and whether they failed. So everything is recorded back in Octane. We can also use Octane to kick off the Jenkins job and execute the automated tests. So there's a number, I'll talk about that when we get to talking about Jenkins. There's a number of ways we could kick off that automated test suite execution. The final piece of the jigsaw in this demo really to mention is the machine or the cloud service that we're using to actually execute the tests on. So as I say, we're using Jenkins as our CI server to pull our automated test suite from GitHub and execute it. So we need a machine to execute that on. So in this case, I'm actually just going to be using the same laptop that I'm delivering this presentation from. So this is actually just going to be a Jenkins node. So Jenkins server is the master. I'm creating a node, which is this laptop, and my tests are going to execute on this laptop. But this could be a Selenium server or a Selenium service in the cloud. It could be Storm Runner function. It could be Mobile Center. There's a number of different endpoints, a number of different ways of executing our tests. And obviously, if we're using something like Storm Runner Functional, it means we can execute those test suites against multiple operating systems using different browsers, and we can do parallel execution and accelerate our test execution. So this is a sort of high-level architecture of the demo that I'm going to go through. And what we're going to do is just break this down bit by bit, and you can see how this builds up. So we're going to start in Octane. Now, it's a little bit difficult, this demo, because in the real world, obviously, there would be different team members in our Agile project with different roles doing different parts, whereas obviously I'm demoing all of this, so this is all me. So the first part is really taking on the role of the Agile team, the three amigos, dev, test, business, who will be defining releases, epics, features, and defining the backlog in Octane, so writing our user stories. Once the user stories have been defined, then obviously they can be ranked, they can be added to releases and added to sprints if it's a Scrum, for example. So we've already got that set up in Octane, which we'll have a look at in a moment. We've already defined a release, an epic. We've got a couple of user stories. So we've got to that point. The user stories are within a sprint, so we'll see those on our team backlog. And at that point, we can then start defining our tests for those user stories. And our tests can be manual tests. So anyone that's using ALM at the moment, Quality Center or ALM.net, in Octane, very, very similar. You can define manual tests with manual test steps, expected results. You can parameterize those manual tests. Those tests, Octane has built-in version control as well, so you can version those tests and look at the changes, roll back to previous versions, etc. It also supports automated tests, and it also supports gherkin tests, which is what we're going to look at here. So part of behavior development, behavior-driven development, writing gherkin scripts, BDD scripts. Octane supports those, and we can write those gherkin tests directly in Octane, and then we can download them all and automate them in our IDE, which is what we're going to look at. Okay, so this is the first part of the jigsaw. So I'll just come out of the slides. Okay, and I've got my web browser open at the moment. 3 tabs. I have got my Jenkins server. I've got my GitHub project. And then finally, I've got Octane. So these are the 3 other key components that we're going to be looking at. Okay, so this is Microfocus ALM Octane, which is designed for agile as well as waterfall project management. So in here, we've got things like our backlog, our team backlog, which contains our storyboard. We also have our defect tracking, and we've also got our pipelines. So this is the connectivity to our CI server, which we can use for executing tests and also for executing, builds and deployments of applications as well, whatever we need as part of the DevOps chain. Okay, and in the team backlog, you can see we also have tests as well. So at the moment, I'm in the backlog. If I just click on backlog items, you can see in here we actually have some epics defined and some features, and in here we've got a couple of user stories. So these user stories have been put into the backlog, they've been ranked, they've been allocated to people and added to a sprint. So if I swap from the backlog to the team backlog, which is our day-to-day storyboard for the current sprint we're in, we can see these user stories in here. Okay, so if I take this second user story and I click on it, so we've now gone into the user story. As a customer, I want to be able to add items to my shopping cart on my online web shop. And there's a tab here, tests, and if I click on tests, I can see any tests that are assigned to this user story or linked to this user story. So in here, GT is a gherkin test, but you can see at this point, I can add manual tests, which are very much like the existing ALM tests, or I can add gherkin tests, or I can even define test suites. So here's a gherkin test, and if I click on it, we can see what that gherkin test looks like by clicking on the script. So this is what a gherkin script looks like. So gherkin scripts are contained within a feature file, which is in fact just a text file. So we have a feature, add items to cart, and then that feature can be broken down into scenarios. And you can think of each scenario as a test case. So scenario, add a cap. This is the name of the scenario. And we can have a number of steps in here. Normally we have sort of anything between 3 and about 7 steps. And here we describe the behavior of the system and our expectations. So given that I'm on the home page, when I search for a cap and add it to the shopping cart, then I can see that in the cart. So we literally have our prerequisite, our action, and then our outcome. So very straightforward writing Gherkin scripts. There is a lot more to it. You can add parameters, examples, tables. There's quite a lot to BDD, but hopefully you can see just from that there's a nice relationship between BDD and agile user stories, because we're just describing the behavior of the system and the outcomes in a very English-like way that everybody can understand. But the beauty of these Gherkin scripts is that we can automate these. Okay, so let's just go back to our storyboard. We've got another story here. As a customer, I want to be able to clear my shopping cart. So let's just go into this and we will create a feature for this. So let's click on tests. So I'm now in this user story. As a customer, I want to be able to clear my shopping cart. Let's create a new Gherkin test and give this a name. We can define what parts of the system this is testing if we want, and I'm going to add this Gherkin test, and at the same time I'm going to click the edit, which allows me to edit it. Okay, so we're into the script. So let's give this feature a name. And let's add a scenario. Remember, a scenario is like a test case. So let's call this clear my cart. Given that I have an item in the shopping cart, when I clear my cart, then no items are left in the cart. And save. So very straightforward. As you can see here, we've got save versions, we've got versions. So for manual tests, Gherkin tests, Octane actually has built-in version control, so we can actually compare versions, roll back to previous versions if there are changes. Okay, so just recapping, all we've done there is we've looked at the fact that Octane for agile project management's got a team backlog. Within there, we've got some user stories. So we've already got a couple of user stories in there, and we have just defined a test for one of those user stories. So we've added a Gherkin script. So what Octane does is it just adds a unique number up here. You can see this little annotation here, TID, test ID, and we have this annotation. And this is what it uses to track when the automated tests run from the results files that are created, whether they passed, whether they failed, and to synchronize that information back to Octane. So this is very key to how the automation works in the case of Gherkin tests. Okay, so I'm just going to add myself there to this. So I'm going to allocate this Gherkin test to myself and save that. And you may have noticed at the top right, this number just changed from 2 to 3. Now this is my work, so you can click on this, or if I click on the main masthead in Octane, then in here we've got my work. So any work that's allocated to me shows in here. So here's my new Gherkin test, clear my cart. And that's now part of my workload. When I finish with this, I can dismiss this. So I'm going to move this into design as well. Let's move that along the phase. So I'm going to start designing this automated test. Okay, so as an automated tester, I'm going to be obviously using an automated tool in an IDE. So in this case, I'm using Eclipse. So I've just swapped to Eclipse now. And there is an Octane plugin for Eclipse, for IntelliJ, for Visual Studio. So, you know, whatever IDE you're using to develop your automated tests, as I say, there's an Octane plugin for it. And it essentially gives you an extra pane window And in Eclipse, you can see that down at the bottom here. If I click on My Work, here we've actually connected to our Octane workspace. So if I click on My Work, I can see the work that's allocated to me. So remember, this is just the same view. If I swap back to Octane, it's the same view as this. When I look at My Work, anything that's allocated to me, user stories, defects, test scripts, then I can actually access and see those directly in my IDE. Okay, now in Eclipse, I actually already have an automation project set up. And remember, we looked at a Gherkin script a moment ago, which was this add items to cart, and this has been pulled from Octane. So we've already got, if I open that up, there we go. We've got the feature that I showed you earlier, which was adding an item to the cart. However, we've just created a new Gherkin test, which is this clearing my cart. So I want to add this to my automation project. So I can simply right click and say, I want to download the script, please. In fact, before I do this, I'm just going to put this in another branch. Okay, I'll come back to what I'm doing in just a moment, but I'm just going to, let's create a new branch. Okay, I'll explain what I'm doing there in a moment, but let's go back to here. So clear my cart. Here it is in my work. I'm going to right click and I'm going to download this Gherkin script into my project. Here's my features folder. Okay, let's just close that and reopen it. That's just a problem with Eclipse. So here's my feature file, clear my cart, open it up. Okay, and here's the feature. So this is exactly what we just created. If I go back to Octane and we go to our tests, here's the clear my cart Gherkin test that I created just a few minutes ago in Octane. We can see it there, and you can see if I go into Eclipse exactly the same. So all I've actually done is download that feature file, that Gherkin script. I've downloaded that from Octane into my IDE, in this case, Eclipse. So we're getting some warnings at the moment because we don't have any automated code associated with this. So let's just have a look at that. Let's just execute this. Let's run this. Yeah. Oh, with Visual Studio Code. I don't think there's a plugin for VS Code. There is for Visual Studio, but not for VS Code as far as I know. But you could still automate it exactly the same. It's just you wouldn't have access to the My Work pane directly. Okay, so I've executed this feature file, this Gherkin script, using Cucumber, and Cucumber has said, oh, you haven't got any methods associated with this. There's no automated code for this. So what it's actually done is it's given me some template code here. So I've got some boilerplate code that I can use. So what I'm going to do is just copy that from the console, and let's create some code for it. So I'm just going to add a new class in here, and let's call this clear cart steps. And let's paste in the code that Cucumber has very kindly generated for me. And we will just fix any of the errors because we just need to import a few libraries here, some of the Cucumber libraries, given, when, then. And this exception as well. Okay, so we've now fixed that. So just to recap where we've got to there, remember we defined a Gherkin script in Octane. We then came into Eclipse, where I am now. We connected to Octane so I can see my work, and we've downloaded that feature file into the project, and we have executed it to create some boilerplate code, and now we have actually created the steps, the step binding, the automation behind it. Okay, now I'm just going to put in here some asserts. For now. So I'm not going to put any automation code in here, any Selenium code for the time being. We already have some Selenium code for the other test here. So we'll actually see it firing up a browser, adding a cap to our shopping cart and checking out. So you'll actually see something happen. But for this illustration here, just to illustrate, we're just going to put some passes and fails in here. So it's not actually going to do anything. We're just going to put in some asserts for true or false. And let's start with a false. So we will pass these two steps, and then we're going to fail this step. Okay, so let's just add the other import. Fix that, add the library that we need. Okay, we'll save everything at that point. So if I actually just close those files and I open up the feature again, clear my cart, then we should see exclamation marks have disappeared. And in fact, we can run this locally. So again, if I just right click, run this as a Cucumber test. There we go, it finishes and we get a fail. We get two trues and a fail. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the sort of workflow as an automated tester. If you're doing, if you're using Gherkin tests, doing BDD, then very straightforward. All of that can be defined in Octane. You can create your tests in Octane. Again, it's normally the three amigos that get together and define the BDD Gherkin tests. Then as an automated tester, I can see any of those tests that have been allocated to me. I can download them directly into my IDE, and I can start automating them, which is what we've just done there. However, there was a step there that I kind of skipped over, which was the fact that my project is under Git. So we're using source control. Now, source control really is imperative if you've got a reasonably sized test automation team. So, if I've got a number of automated testers all working on the same automated test suite, then I need some way of managing that. So for any of you out there who've been, using UFT and you've been doing that in a team, you'll know that if somebody goes and changes something in the object repository, it can have a knock-on effect to everyone else's tests. So we need some kind of way of working together without overwriting each other's work and or without affecting each other's work. So the solution to that is source control, and we could be using Git, we could using SVN. So in this case, I'm using Git, and I'm using this locally in my IDE. So in Eclipse, I'm writing my automated scripts, and I am checking those in locally into my local Git project. However, what I've also done is pushed that project that we're looking at there up to GitHub. So if I just swap back to the browser and I click on this tab, here is GitHub, and this is the project that I'm currently working on. So in here are my features, which we've just been looking at. There's the add items to the cart, so my features, my code bindings. So my Eclipse project, my automation project, has been pushed up to GitHub. So within GitHub, I've got this fantastic web-based interface, a nice GUI interface to my project. In here, people can raise issues. We can have conversations about the test, so it's very much a collaboration tool. And we can also do clever things like branching, creating pull requests, which we're going to have a look at in just a moment. Okay, so just highlighting the next steps from that sort of big overview you saw at the beginning. Octane, we create some Gherkin scripts. They're in my work. I've downloaded those into my IDE. I am now making some changes to this, which I'm going to push up to GitHub. So all of our testers can work locally, independently, but we can all work on the same automated test suite project, which we can see in GitHub and collaborate on with the tools that are available there. Now, this demo is a little bit more complicated than that, because what I want to show is some of the benefits of using GitHub, things that we can do. So in a GitHub project, we've got a master branch, and that's our main automated test suite, if you like. That's our main project, which is on GitHub, the master branch. But what we can do is control people changing or making changes to that. So the automation engineers who are working locally and committing their changes to their local Git repository can do that within a branch. So they can create a branch for the work they're doing. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, if I'm going to write some new tests, as I've just done, instead of me writing those tests and adding them directly to the main project, I can create them in a separate branch, test them, run them, make sure I'm happy with them. I can then create a pull request for that branch and say, look, I've made some changes here. I think they're great. Somebody else can then review those changes, and if they're happy with them, they can then merge them into the main project. So it's a way of controlling the changes that happen to our automated test suite and making sure that nothing gets broken. In other words, a review process before they are added into the master branch. So just quickly, if I go back to Eclipse, that's what I did here. So in Eclipse, Git repositories, I did a right click here, switch to, and I created a new branch. So I'm actually working in a new branch now, and I've made some changes. I've saved those changes. And if I click on Git staging, you can see those new files in here. So here are the two files, new files that I've created, and I can then commit these and I can push them up to the GitHub project as a new branch, and then create a pull request if I'm happy with those for someone to review those changes before merging them into the main project. Okay, so the GitHub, we've got this master, which is our master test suite project. We've got a number of automation engineers who are working independently, and they're making changes, adding new tests, whatever it may be. They can then raise a pull request, so they can commit these locally to their local Git repository. And then when they're happy with those and they want to merge those into the master, into the main automation project, they can raise a pull request. Someone can review those changes and decide whether they are accepted. And we'll look at some of the collaboration tools in just a moment. Okay, so before I actually push those new tests, that new Gherkin test that we've just done, the last part of this is the fact that we want to be able to execute this automation test suite. And we're going to do that using our CI server. So we're going to do that using Jenkins in this case, but it could be, say, TeamCity, Bamboo, TFS. So we are going to create, in fact, there's one created, but we can have a quick look at it, a job in Jenkins that will pull that automated project from GitHub, because remember, all of our automator engineers are working on that same project, which is hosted on GitHub. So we can use Jenkins to pull that project, to build it and execute it on an endpoint on a particular machine, or you know, in the Selenium server or Stormrunner functional, wherever it may be. So execute the test suite and then pass those results back to Octane. So we'll have a look at the Jenkins job in just a moment, but what we also need to do is, once we've defined the Jenkins job, we need to tell Octane about that Jenkins job. So within Octane, we have a pipelines module, which allows us to see the pipelines and connect to the pipelines, the jobs within Jenkins, and to be able to trigger those, execute those, look at the results. So we have this very close synchronization between Octane and your CI server, because remember, it's your CI server that's actually doing the test execution for you, or triggering the execution. Okay, so let's just go back and see that. So if I go back into the web browser, and this time I'm going to go into Jenkins. So we've already got a Jenkins job here. And we can have a quick look at the job if you want. It's pretty straightforward. In this case, that automation project, remember I'm using Selenium WebDriver Java in that case and Cucumber, and it's actually just a Maven project. So in Jenkins, all I've done is created a new Maven project, and I've told it where the GitHub project is. So we have a link to GitHub. I've told it where I want to execute it, in this case on my local machine. And then here is the Git part. So the source code management, we're integrating with Git. This is the repository. So there's my GitHub project, which we've just looked at, and it will actually pull the project from GitHub into the local workspace and then build it and then execute it using Maven. So if I carry on down, let's go down to the build. Here is the build step. So the build step is literally just using Maven. It's a Maven project. So we're using Maven and we are executing the test goal. So it's going to validate, build, execute all of our Cucumber tests in this case. And then finally, the post-build actions, we are using the Octane Cucumber test reporter. So there is an add-in for Jenkins that will take the results from our test execution and then automatically populate those back to Octane. Now, there's one other bit that I haven't mentioned here is the build triggers. So we've got a Jenkins job that's going to execute our test automation project, and we can execute that from Octane. We can execute it from Jenkins, or we can set up build triggers. So we might want to execute it at 2 o'clock in the morning every night. We might want to execute it when there's a new build of the application deployed. In this case, I've actually told it that if there are any pull requests created, so when going back into Eclipse, remember in here, I'm working in a separate branch here. If I push these changes I've made to the project up to GitHub in a new branch and make a pull request for those, as soon as the pull request is created, at that point it will trigger the automated test. So it'll execute my branch and then provide the results of whether they passed or failed back into GitHub. So it's a little bit more complex in this case. You don't have to go this complex. This is just showing some of the things that are, that it is capable of. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the main Jenkins here and connect my local machine, because it's my local machine that we're going to do the execution on. So I'm just going to provide this as the node to execute the job on. Okay, so that's connected. That's great. Okay, so we're going back into Eclipse now. So in Eclipse, remember I've made these changes and I haven't actually committed these yet. So I'm going to put these into staging, give them a commit message. And I'm going to commit these locally, and then I'm going to push them to GitHub as well. So here's my GitHub remote project or repository. This is the branch, so not master, but I'm pushing this new branch I've created, and we will push that up. Okay, we can see the bottom right, that's just occurring now. Okay, and that's finished. So if we then go to GitHub, we can see that in here. So there's a recently pushed branch. Here's the ClearCart demo. This is the branch, the changes I've been making. Now those haven't, if I look in here, those haven't appeared in here yet. because they haven't been merged into master yet. They are a separate branch at the moment. So at this point, I can create a pull request and say, look, I've made some changes here and I've pushed these up to the GitHub project. You know, there's a branch here. I would like someone to review these, please. And if they are happy with them, then to merge them into the main master project. So let's just do that. We'll open a pull request. Now remember, the way that I've created my Jenkins job is I've used this as a trigger. So I've said as soon as a pull request is created, Jenkins is going to execute that branch and provide the results back to GitHub, whether they passed or failed. So this is part of the verification. So I'm saying I've created some new automated tests here. I want to add those to the main automation project. I want someone to verify those. Here's the proof that they execute and they pass. So let's create the pull request. Okay, and we can see straight away we've got some checks haven't completed yet. And we've got pending, build triggered. So this is saying, right, part of this is that these tests have to pass before they're added to the master, and they haven't actually executed yet. Now, if I go back to Jenkins, you can see that it is actually executing. So that's triggered the job. We're back in Jenkins. The job's been triggered. Remember, this is pulling my automation project from GitHub. It's going to build it, and it's going to execute it. So there we go. This is the automation. So the first test case, remember, this actually does do something. It actually adds a cap to the shopping cart, checks, validates that it's there. So there's my first cucumber test. The second test is the one that we created. So it literally just has some passes and fails in there. So we should get a failure. If you remember, I put a fail step in there. There we go. And if we look at the test result, so this is all in Jenkins at the moment. Here are my scenarios. Can expand those out, and we can see here's the add a cap. The add a cap passed. The clear my cart failed. So this is the failure that I created. Okay, so that's kind of just showing you that it works, but something I'll just quickly show you here is that the results also get populated, because that's the way we've defined our Jenkins job, the very close integration with GitHub, which is fantastic. So as I say, we can get it to automatically pull projects from GitHub, build them, execute them, create results. We can see all that posted back into GitHub. So we can see here that the checks have failed, and I can't merge the pull request. So in other words, I've actually implemented this. You don't have to at all. It's probably a little bit over the top, but it's just showing what can be done. So this is saying, right, I've created some new tests, or I've amended something in the project. I want those changes to go into the main automation project. As soon as I create the pull request, it runs that branch, those tests, but the tests have failed. So it's saying, no, you're not allowed to. You can't merge those changes in because you've still got a problem here. Those tests are failing. Now, under Agile, you may want them to fail because that's part of, the test-driven approach. So this is something you may not want to implement, but it's just showing you kind of what's capable with the integration between GitHub and Jenkins. Okay, now there's something that I haven't done, so we'll get this to pass in a moment. We'll merge those in. But there's one point that I've completely forgotten to do, and that is if I go into Octane, we won't get the results back into Octane at the moment because I haven't actually told Octane about our Jenkins job. So in Octane, I'm going to pipelines. There are no pipelines at the moment. Click Add. Choose my CI server, which in this case is my Jenkins job. Find the job, which is here. Give it a name. I'll give it the same name so it's easy to identify. I can specify the release this is against. I can specify what kind of this is, because remember, we may have pipelines in Octane that we need to trigger, which may be building the application. We may have ones for unit testing, another one for integration tests. You know, we might have a number of pipelines here, a number of Jenkins jobs to perform different tasks. So this is where the synchronization takes place. So currently we've got no run in here, because we've only just added the pipeline. Okay, so I'm now going back to GitHub. I know I'm jumping around a little bit here, but you know, we were talking about the fact that Jenkins has executed the job failed, so that branch cannot be merged in. Now this is just to show you some of the the tools in here. So for this branch, we can actually see, so if somebody wants to review this, we can add reviewers. We can see the files that have changed. So I can click on this and we can see that there are 2 new files. Here's my code bindings, and here is the feature file that we looked at earlier. And we can use this to review changes. We can even make notes at particular lines of code. So at this point here, I might add a comment and say, I think this needs to be true. And I can start a review or add a single comment. So another tester, or the person that, you know, I'm obviously acting several roles here. So that's the reviewer, the person who created the automated tests. Can add to that. At any point we can finish reviews, we can add comments, start conversations. So we can look at, you know, within our code, using this very much as a collaboration tool. So here's that branch that failed a few minutes ago. If I expand that out, you can see we've got the comments in here. So anyone can add reviews, comments. We can use this very much as a collaboration tool to fix any issues we've got. Okay, so somebody's just put a note in here about this. I've said, okay, I'm going to change that, run it again, and then hopefully we can execute that. And we can see the results coming back into Octane now as well, because we set that connectivity. So let's go back into Eclipse and fix the problem. Wrong file, which was this one. So let's make this pass. Let's save that. Here are my changes. And we'll just commit and we'll push that up. Now remember, I'm still working in this separate branch at the moment, clear-cut demo. So I now need to go back to GitHub and make a pull request again. Clear-cut demo. Swap to that. What have I done here? Let's go to the branch. Bear with me. Let's go back. New pull request. Choose your branch. Oh, sorry about this. I'm doing this the wrong way around, aren't I? There we go. View pull request. Oh, is the test just run? Sorry about that. I missed it. So yeah, as soon as I committed those changes, because there was a pull request already for that, I was missing that then. And I've made those changes and committed those, pushed them up to the same branch. Those tests have run, which I missed there, but we can see the checks have now passed, and then I can merge that into master. So those tests have just executed. We can merge those in. If I go back to Jenkins, we should see that in here. So here's the pass. Sorry, I just missed the test running then. We can look at the test result. And there we go. Both of our tests have now passed. And if I go back to Octane and do a refresh, okay, and we get the pass. Let's just go onto the view and the runs. Okay, and we get our pass back in here. I'm not sure why the tests haven't picked up there. Let's just do a refresh again there. Maybe because I didn't actually add the pipeline earlier. So ordinarily, we'd also be able to see the tests and the results of those tests in there. There we go. So we can see that in here. So here's add items to cart, clear my cart, which is the new test, and we can see that that has passed. I think we can't see the results in the pipeline because I didn't add the pipeline until later. We'd already executed that branch before I added the pipeline. So apologies for that, but you can see that in here anyway. The results get reflected back, so we can see the tests and we can see whether they passed or failed. Okay, so quite a complex picture there. It's a little bit difficult because obviously I'm acting as everybody there, the automation engineer, you know, the Octane DevOps, the team who are developing the Gherkin scripts. But it just shows what can be done with the integration. As I say, using GitHub is great because it means that we can manage our automated testing suite project between a number of automation engineers, so nobody can affect anyone else's work. We can put in some verification, some checks in there before we allow those changes to be added to the automation test suite. We can also use GitHub as our collaboration tool, so the automated engineers can use these to comment on other people's code, review code changes, raise issues. Also with GitHub, there's great integration with the CI tools. So in this case, I'm using Jenkins, and I can get Jenkins very easily to pull my GitHub project, to build it, execute it, and we've got then the integration with Octane, so the results get passed back to Octane. So we end up with this complete chain that we can automate and see the results reflected automatically back into Octane. Okay, so if there's only a number, if there's only a couple of automation engineers, one or two who are actually doing the test automation, then they could be using GitHub, and they could actually just be using the master branch at that point. So you wouldn't have to worry too much about branching. Also, you don't have to do what I've done, which is restrict the fact that you can't merge into the master unless the tests have passed. So all of that is open for configuration. It's probably a little bit over the top what I'm showing you, but it's just showing you some of the stuff that's actually available when you get onto automated testing with Octane. Also, I've only shown you one quick tool stack there. So just to say that, integration wise, and this is the great thing about Octane, it's a real open architecture. So it really fits into the DevOps ideology of being able to use whatever tools are appropriate for the job. So CI servers, we could be using Jenkins, Bamboo, TeamCity, TFS, GoCD, GitLab. Source control, we can be using Git, GitHub, SVN. Automated testing, really it's up to you. UFT, just a special note on UFT, UFT and Storm Runner Functional, so the Microfocus tools, really close integration with those. Benefit of Storm Runner Functional is the fact that we can then start executing our tests in the cloud, so we can execute them on multiple platforms, we can execute them in parallel, we can execute them using web testing in different browsers, so we can do all of that. UFT as well, so if you've got UFT tests and you add that UFT project to GitHub, then that will synchronize automatically with Octane. So within Octane, if you're using UFT, you can get Octane to automatically look at your UFT project and say, right, you've got all these tests, and it will create the tests in Octane for you, which you can then link to your user stories. So then you've got that that traceability. So the automated testing tools really up to you. You could be using UFT, LeanFT. So Microfocus LeanFT would be very similar to what I've just demonstrated, as it's a code-driven API. So UFT, LeanFT, Mobile Center, Storm Runner. Does Octane have an open API? Yes, I believe it does. Yeah, I'll come back to you on that, and I can send you some information about it. But I'm pretty sure I read that it does. Mobile Center, Storm Runner Functional, Appium, Selenium. Most other tools as well, automated tools that produce kind of an XUnit type results file, so JUnit, NUnit, TestNG files. Those results then can get populated back to Octane. With the CI, there is a direct plugin. So if you're using things like Storm Runner Functional, UFT, there is a plugin for Jenkins and for the other CI servers that allow you to execute those automated tests directly from your CI server. Because remember, it's your CI server that's actually doing the test execution and then just passing the results back to Octane. Synchronization. So if you're already using a product like Jira, you can synchronize with Octane, which is great. So you can do that one way or two way. So all of your epics, user stories, etc., can be synced between the two, because Jira obviously doesn't have the test management built in where Octane does. So we've got full test management in here. We can execute tests. We can create manual tests, Gherkin tests. We can execute those manually. We can add automated tests. There's also synchronization with the old ALM, ALM.NET. IDE plugins, so the current plugins available at Eclipse, IntelliJ, Visual Studio. Somebody did ask me about VS Code. I don't believe there is at the moment, but again, we can get back to Microfocus and ask if that's something that they're thinking about. So it's just to say, you know, the demonstration I've done is just one tool chain. Really, Octane can fit into just about all the popular tool chains that people are using out there for DevOps. Okay, so email contact, steve.brooker@eohuk.com if you've got any further questions following this. A couple of URLs there as well, the Octane help. So that tells you about installation, integrations, etc., system requirements. BDD, so if you're new to behavior-driven development, so if you're thinking what on earth was all that stuff about Gherkin, feature files, scenarios, if that's something you're interested in, fits very well into the agile methodology, then there's a URL there on a short blog. It's also got a video of a previously recorded webinar which will introduce you to BDD as well. Okay, so as I say, the session was recorded, so we'll pass out the link to the recording because I know there's a lot of content in there. We're using a lot of tools. Just have a look at the questions. Okay, so no other questions at the moment. So if anyone's got any questions they want to ask now, fire away and I'll try and answer. Can it run on tests on Performance Center? Yes, it does. Yeah, it integrates with Performance Center as well. So yeah, you know, something I haven't mentioned there is obviously performance testing. We do have there are integrations into Performance Center and also mobile testing. So mobile testing, it also integrates with Microfocus's Mobile Center as well, or you could use Appium. So yeah, supports mobile testing as well.
Okay, well, thanks, Tom. That was fantastic. I think a lot of detail there. I hope everyone enjoyed that. As Thomas said, if you've got any questions, then please come back to us. Also, if you want to follow up around Octane, the functionality of Octane, but also if you've got questions about GitHub or questions about Jenkins and the integrations between the components, then please drop us a line, send us an email, give me a call, whatever you want to do. Thanks everyone for your time. I'm sure I'll be speaking to some of you later, and as we said, this will be recorded, so it will be available, and we'll be issuing the link so that you can see that. So on that note, I'll say goodbye to everyone, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, everybody. All right, bye.